today we have this essay by Rajeswari Rajan called Outlaw Women, the Politics of Phulan Devi's Surrender. Phulan Devi was this bandit, a very iconic figure in India, recent Indian history. Many issues come out of this, and Rajeswari Sundarajan is basically looking at one of the aspects is, of course, the gender issue comes up here very strongly, but it's also a kind of confronting feminism as a modern sort of social movement, which is grounded in Enlightenment ideals. And its relation, and its sort of relation to this particular event, which is a unusual one for feminism to handle at all. But it also brings up questions of the basic I think today would also be useful to have a discussion on subaltern studies in this context, because subaltern studies has taken a particular stand vis-a-vis what the category of the subaltern, which includes say figures like Phulan Devi, that is the poorest of the poor, the lower caste, the tribal and other sort of marginalized peoples of India, and their sort of invisibility in the national historical discourse. Right, in the discourse of modern India, and what is to be how to deal with that question and what issues arise. And so one issue I'll bring up later is how Dipesh Chakravarti, for instance, discusses certain figures in Indian history which might have something to which might speak to the issues that Sundarajan brings up vis-a-vis Phulan Devi. So yeah, we will get started with Chris's presentation.
Okay, I will give a very brief one, I think. And then the picture you see, I guess, should be the one described at first part of the first paragraph. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
It is, but there is a mystery to it. We'll come to it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And at first, Rajan just tell the reader her concern is the relationship between the woman and the post-colonial Indian state, and the entry of women outlaw break the usual relationship between the two. The post-independence Indian nation statehood and the gender agency from the forms a negotiated relationship. That is an intriguing crisis of citizenship. And she then tells us why she focused on the surrender in the seats. The first point is that the surrender thing is the direct confrontation between the singular citizen subject and the representative of the state. And the second reason is that the new territory of citizen identity can be seen in this kind of surrender. Is that okay to be read? Yeah. The size. Okay.
Okay, enlarge it.
Then is the material of her analysis, authorized biography and the film. And then in the part is the brief introduction of
Phulan Devi.
Phulan Devi. And she was a woman who was married off quite young and then run away from the man. And her image was usually interpreted as a kind of women who fight against poor low caste. And Sunder Rajan keeps telling us that before she goes further and she has it is necessary for her to give a clean statement about the state of Indian feminism. And first, she described the relationship between the feminism and the state. And mostly, the feminism movement is asked for the guarantee for the gender equality and the reforms in legal aspect. You can see from the quote I gave. It reads the value of Indian state in these 50 years of independence are not only laws of gaps between promise and the delivery, progressive laws and their failed implementation, but a betrayal at a deeper level. The neutral state has been exposed as a myth, as a successive government's support of patriarchal and upper-class and majoritarian religious interact has impossible to ignore. And then the feminism discovered that the emphasis on legal reform is not enough. So the struggle for social transformation by democratic process requires equal attention to other sides, family, religious communities, caste relation, to their connection to the state. And then she tells us the relationship of feminists with philosophy. Pulan.
Yeah, Pulan is enough.
Pulan, okay.
Pulan Devi.
Pulan Devi. And she tells us that basically feminists are silent to her existence because Pulan is not a feminist figure or a figure from the feminism. And she also mentioned that the military feminism is not quite liked by feminism. And the question I ask here is, what is the problem of military feminism? And Sunder Rajan further tells us that if Pulan is a kind of victimized woman, and maybe the feminism could have different kind of viewpoint toward her. And then she gives us the introduction of the faculties. And from the quote you can see that in the popular imagination they are also dreaded and admired figures of heroism, not evil. And then she tells us that the crime also challenge the law, because here it seems that the crime can be defined as good ones or bad ones. And then what she say is about the modern India and its bandit, and the social banditry is a phenomenon of the past, and
This is the homespun.
Huh?
Homespun line, right?
Homespun, yes, yes. Yeah, the Hobsbawm. It's the Hobsbawm's description of social banditry in England and Europe, which is used to compare with the That's okay, go ahead, you can continue.
okay, then she just try to discuss why this kind of why there is a kind of distinguish between sorry here I think that she is trying to say why she have to discuss this part first, because it seems to her that the bandit here is kind of national, plays the role of national shanks in the modern India. And usually viewed as a kind of anarchism or remnant of the feudal past. The predominant aspect of the nation must be brought into the fold of modernity by administration, but this aspect, while appearing to be survivals, are instead considerably altered phenomenon produced by and feeding into the circumstances of modern social and political reality. But she also gives us an idea that the party and the caste and the criminals are somehow linked together. And also, she mentioned that the remand of the colonial remand is just kind of it exists in every aspect, including the part of knowledge. So when a deputy inspector general of the place in Gawaliyo tells the writer of the biography that she should read the book of the Francis Turtle on Henry Solomon. He mentioned that here, as always, colonial bureaucracy provides the systematic knowledge and understanding that the modern post-colonial state draws on for its own rules and strategy of government. that from all this, Sunder Rajan is trying to say that difficulty is a kind of complicated production that is not just what people regard them as a simple criminal or something like. So that is the reason why she have to spend so much words to explain its existence. And then she moved to the surrender of land and the beforehand the negotiation of her with the government. And just as what Sunder Rajan kept telling us that Fulan's surrender is conditional. She didn't negotiate with the state beforehand, and then she thinks that there are some parts we should discuss when we talk about her surrender. And the first part is that actually her surrender is a kind of political gimmick, not just a kind of because because just as what she said before, that we have to examine the history of the post-colonial Indian state of the whole issue. And here she mentioned the part about that the state or the government pay extremely attention to those outlaw criminals and keep persuading them to surrender. And here, Fulan is like a kind of a case of this kind. But what makes she special is that her identity as a low caste woman. And so Sunder Rajan thinks that if we are going to talk about her surrender, we should talk about first caste. Here she said that caste certainly predominate in the internal politics of the hospitality of the state government and the religion elite against her, and it consequently also provide the strength of her own mobilization of the fighting against her opponents. And then, what she will talk further is about the gender part. To Sunder Rajan, that most of the discussion about Fulan do not touch the part about gender, not until the film Bandit Queen appeared. The gender part, the discussion about gender is late. And she also asked us to pay attention about the women and the male dominant state.
Yeah. I had this. So after finishing these notes, which were maybe circulated, there's some other visuals and yeah. This is one of the most extraordinary things of recent history. This woman and her, if you go by the background, from which she came, and this life which has become so entangled with the state machinery at the highest level, and not just in terms of antagonism, but in her own life, she becomes a member of parliament after having surrendered, and she's then assassinated while she was still a member of parliament by somebody who was taking revenge on her for what she did as a bandit. Dacoit is the Indian word for bandit. That's dacoity is basically that's the idea. Now, these are just to give an idea of what kind of issue this. These are the images. See, this is Phulan Devi and her gang member coming to surrender. They are just walking across the fields to this place, and these are some of these are the and you can see that police and politicians and others are surrounding them. These are all dacoits, and there are police. And this is her, in a kind of drawing. And that's her saluting this crowd which gathered at the surrender scene, right? So she was in Bhind, in a small place in Madhya Pradesh, the central province of India. And this is her as an MP, as a member of parliament. You can see her with her own bodyguard. She it's no longer a dacoit, but a bodyguard who is standing with her, behind her, protecting her. And that is her inside parliament. You can see that the parliament seats there. And this is after she died. You can these people who are carrying her bier, they are members of this party, Samajwadi, the Socialist Party. The president and he was general secretary. This man was president, and so it's like a very big state funeral like thing. And this is her in her youth, in her as a dacoit. You can see that it's a very simple, and that's her in a more traditional costume. Now, the interesting thing about it is, Rajeswari Sundarajan, as Chris pointed out, she gives you this the iconic image, right? The iconic image is Phulan Devi at her surrender, holding the rifle up like this with both hands and greeting the crowd like that. Actually speaking, that image is not from the surrender itself. See, this is the image, but you can see it's a painting. And where did this image come from? Basically, it comes from the film. At the surrender was not so, there was no sort of victorious sign at the surrender, She did wave to the crowd and all, you can see that, like that kind of image. But it was not a surrender in which she of course negotiated, tough negotiations as we saw. But this film made her an international figure. Shekhar Kapoor, who is of course an internationally sort of known film director, and a very controversial film based on a biography. Although biography was an authorized biography, Phulan Devi cooperated with the biographer, but when the film was made, they had certain scenes which she objected to, because first of all she said she stripped naked by the villagers of Bahmai in the film and made to walk and so on. And she objected to that kind of a portrayal because her own self-image is not that of that kind of a victim, right? She doesn't want that image to be to represent her. So she had objections, but of course they then have to negotiate and so on. But in spite of the fact that this image is from a film rather than from the actual surrender, it is in that sense iconic, because in some ways I think it tries to capture the popular sense of that identification with this figure, right? Because she is a figure who represents oppression of the worst kind that is still prevalent in India, and everybody, the people around that area, they and all over India, there is a sense of identification with her oppression, with her story, right? So in that sense, it is you can say an iconic sort of image, which has some basis in the actual reception that she got. Now, another aspect of it is that the Indian state has been not the Indian state, but various reformist figures, Gandhians, had been trying for a long time, from the 60s onwards, to make these people surrender and to become one with, to give up criminal life and become ordinary citizens and so on. Now, interestingly, what Rajeswari Sundarajan does is to contrast two moments in this whole story. One is in the 60s and early 70s, when the Gandhians were in charge of this movement, this effort to make dacoits surrender. It had a certain exalted quality to it. It was like something you were doing for the country. So even the dacoit who surrendered would feel a sense of participation in some larger project, right? Whereas by the time that 80s, when Phulan Devi surrenders, she is the whole political gimmick question, which the gimmick there is that these state governments are trying to get some mileage out of it, saying we did this and therefore it's our triumph, we made Phulan Devi surrender and so on. So it becomes a kind of competition between political parties. So it no longer has that kind of old force to it. Now this area in central India, somewhere north central, Chambal Valley it's called. It's a very inhospitable terrain. It's hard to go through that. If you're it's not a place where you could just normally walk around. Even if there were no dacoits, it's a very inhospitable geography. It's terrible. No water, dusty, full of thorny bushes, no trees, no that kind of a place, lawless. And so that's where these dacoits have been hiding. And cinema, there's been a lot of cinema, there's a whole genre. Just as Americans have cowboy films, Indians have these dacoit films, lots of them. And the interesting thing about it is the dacoit figure is always seen as a rebel against the injustices of mainstream society, right? In these dacoit films. And it's only in the late 70s that the dacoit becomes less of a social figure and becomes more of a criminal. So the Hobsbawm, the narrative is also interesting, which is Hobsbawm is basically talking about this kind of social banditry, which basically comes to an end in the late 18th century. But after that, in Europe at least, there is no such phenomenon. So in other words, in Europe it's very clear that it's a phenomenon of the pre-modern world, which slowly died out, right? As the societies became more and more industrialized and governments, the state became more and more a rational policy state, it was able to eliminate all these kinds of things from its terrain, which means that in pre-modern societies there are different spaces which are not unified, right? it is the modern state that unifies all spaces and eliminates any challenge to itself. That the state will not brook any challenge, right? You cannot bear arms, right? There are certain rules about the sovereignty. That is, only the state can bear arms, right? Citizens are not supposed to. So citizens can have arms for self-defense, but not for waging war against one another. That kind of a thing. So in that sense, in India, you have this what is essentially a social phenomenon of banditry caused by poverty and oppression and rebellion is surviving well into the 20th century. So it gives you a certain idea of what kind of society it is, right? Because it is still not a society which has been completely taken over by the state and reconstructed according to the rational sort of logic of the modern state. It is still a place where there are multiple spaces, where people can, actually sort of live outside of the framework of the law, right? That kind of a situation prevails. So, which means that it, so in the colonial period, it's understandable that the colonial governments, of course, there were these forests. There were lots of forests and other kinds of areas which the police or the army couldn't quite easily penetrate, where they didn't have the kind of knowledge that the people who lived there had, so they remained there. But the modern Indian state, as the shame, the feeling that it's a shame to have such it's also sort of suggests that the state is too weak. It doesn't really have sovereign power, right? So there is kind of a question of this kind of anarchic freedom, which if claimed by so many people, is a direct slap in the face of the state, saying it's not strong enough. So then it's also a question of what kind of relation then prevails. So one model is you can go back to Hobsbawm, right, and you can say, well, just as in Europe, the social banditry sort of survived for a while and then disappeared with the modern state coming into its own. In India also, you can say that it is a similar sort of situation. We are transiting, we are moving from that kind of a situation to a modern situation. And here also, as it happened in Europe, it will all disappear, right? So that is like saying that the narrative of modernity will repeat itself in India. But what she is also, Rajeswari Sundarajan is also arguing is, in a way, that is not, there is a way in which in this interaction, it is not a one-sided story of modernity relentlessly bearing down on this and reducing their power. Rather, it begins to negotiate with those elements. So it's a peculiar kind of problem, isn't it? Where this relates to what Partha Chatterjee was saying about the political society. Because what he says is that political society makes demands which the state cannot meet within the terms of its rationality. It has to go out of that rationality, out of the legal system, make an exception of it, and then negotiate and deal with it. And each time it happens, it is treated as an exception, right? So here you have another case. It's a negotiation. So what is the negotiation? The Indian state is actually negotiating with the bandit. And the bandit knows that once you agree and sign on the paper, you will be in their hands. You will no longer have any privileges. You will no longer be able to claim anything. Your life will be then determined by your new status as a legal citizen. So they try their hardest to get a good bargain, you know. So Phulan Devi argues for, she says my family must be given some money, my my where children must be educated and other things. She actually asks for these kinds of things, for something for herself, how long, but that she should not be sent to prison and all this. Of course, the state doesn't keep the promise, because once you surrender, there's also there. But at least on paper, the state has to give this in writing, that and sign an agreement. So in that sense, a very extraordinary thing, and also rendered particularly unusual, because this is a woman. Dacoits, these dacoits are not normally women, they are men, and they live in this. She becomes a dacoit. She is, as Chris has said, married off in early childhood to somebody, sold basically, some old man, and she escapes, and she finds shelter in this, with this another man. Then she becomes his wife, and in this Behmai, there's a gang raped, right, as a young woman. She then, when she is dacoit leader, she takes her gang, goes back to the village, and massacres a number of those people who had raped her and so on. So it's one of them, one of the relatives of that, who later assassinates her. So you can't actually write a film narrative which is more sort of it's like it's quite an extraordinary story of revenge and so on. So then she, of course, she marries again, and the second time she marries, the husband is not, she still continues to be the leader. The husband is not anymore the dominant person. And the Samajwadi party, that is the socialist party, which then, gives her membership in there, they know that she'll catch votes. Because again, that kind of a popularity, which is based on identification with her suffering, is very, very strong. And indeed, the first, she stands for elections and she wins, and becomes a member, and so you have this extraordinary spectacle of a criminal who is sitting in parliament, and so in a sense, it is a story at one level of the new India, where anybody can become a member of parliament, that kind of a thing. That it's incredible story of this person actually reaching that thing. But at another level, it is also a narrative of the criminalization of Indian politics, right? Because there are many criminals, not like her, not people, oppressed people like Phulan Devi, but people who are criminals in another way. They grab other people's land, they do all those other things. Those other kinds of criminals, who are the rich and the powerful, they are also in politics. So this story also joins that story as a criminalization of your politics kind of narrative. And Samaj, the Socialist Party, is then seen as a party which encourages that kind of a trend. And so there is a kind of division, in the sort of the bourgeois political sphere, looking very displeased with this kind of development, saying, what are these kinds of people? How can such people be, become members of parliament, and they represent us in parliament and so on? This is not good. And whereas, other people seem to think that these kinds of figures somehow enable them to have something, their representation in some other form. Obviously, it's not a representation of class interests, right? When you vote for Phulan Devi, it's not because she will represent your class interests, as working class people or poor people, etc. But because somehow she already represents you as a member of the oppressed, that one of us is there in parliament. They know that in that kind of a sense, which is not tied to any class interest thing. So, in that then Sundarajan's one major question Sundarajan will take up is feminism's relation to this kind of thing. So, feminism with its, as I said, its grounding in enlightenment sort of ideas, right? In the modern state, as we saw, India is a developmental state, the welfare state. It takes on the project of development and says politics should not interfere with development and so on. And early feminism, according to this narrative, basically restricts itself to demanding more from the state to enhance gender equality. So essentially they are putting forth sort of demands for demands which are very much within the purview of the developmental state, right? All well known things like amelioration, better education, special provisions for girl children, and those kinds of things. So for them, a figure like Phulan Devi, it's hard for them to take her as a feminist sort of case. So in fact, what happens is feminists by and large ignore this. They have nothing to really they are not willing to speak up for Phulan, saying she is a victim, gender sort of injustice, and that it is a case that should be taken up in that sense and so on. Because as Rajeswari Sundarajan says, bourgeois feminism, this kind of developmental feminism, will take up those issues if the person concerned is a victim. But Phulan is not a victim. That is, she is a victim, but she is not sort of coming forward as a victim. She is not a raped poor woman who says, look, I have been done injustice. She takes it on herself to retaliate. So she is not presenting herself as injured, right? So in that sense, she comes across as a figure of power rather than a victim figure, and therefore it's very troubling for the feminist discourse of the time. That's the sort of point that she is making here very strongly. Got it. So feminism and the bandit, the relationship between women in the post-colonial state. So for instance, she gives other examples, Amina case, Amina case is a case where a woman was married off to an Arab sheikh, and a small girl actually, a teenager, and she was, he was taking her back to his home in some Arab country, and this girl was found crying in the plane, and so she is rescued and the man is arrested and so on, and this becomes a very celebrated case of victimhood of Indian women in poverty, right? This girl was from Hyderabad and she was sold, and it is a common occurrence that rich Arab people, men, come to India, and especially to Muslim sort of concentrations like Hyderabad, looking for these brides, and they essentially end up as domestic servants in their back home. Once they go back, that's what they end up as, or worse. So that's the kind of thing. That is now something that Indian feminists took up in a big way, right? It became a huge, big case. Prostitution laws, the sort of a need for rationalizing prostitution laws, making them less unfriendly to the women concerned, those kinds of issues have been taken up. And issues like sterilization of mentally retarded women, which used to happen in some hospitals and so on. This was taken up. Female infanticide, which is a very huge problem in India, right? Because of these male children, the preference for male children. and the poverty and the difficulties of looking after and difficulties of marrying off, all kinds of things which lead to infanticide, either through abortions, through sex detection in the fetus, or after birth. Both kinds of things are practiced, right? So these are some of the issues. These are developmental issues. That is, in all of these, what you can see is a certain backwardness of the people, right? People are superstitious, backward, their thinking is not progressive, enlightened, and so feminism is happy to intervene in such situations, wants to intervene in such situations to try and change the situation, to make people more educated, to bring more enlightenment to the masses, to prevent these kind of backward practices, and so on. So none of so Phulan doesn't fit into these kinds of scenarios. Was what the point is making. The surrender was a direct face-to-face and precariously symmetrical encounter between the singular citizen subject and the officials and representative of the state. Right? So a moment, a very brief moment, but nevertheless a moment in which they are on an equal plane. Phulan is on par with the state. This is which is never how it is supposed to be. So from a very lower caste background, Vikram Malla is the husband and surrenders in. So here, quoting another feminist thinker, Mary John, she says, importance of state for Indian feminism. The state is the most constitutive site of contestation. That is, Indian feminism struggles have all been fought on the site of the state itself, not outside of that. That's one thing to. In the early days, a liberal faith in constitutional guarantees of gender equality and reform laws and other provisions was characteristic of Indian feminism. But soon, as already Chris has pointed out, feminism developed a critical relation to the state without giving up on the state. That is, continued to have the same kind of thing, but also lost some of those the early faith, that the state can actually make things all right, everything will be sorted out. That was lost. That kind of faith was lost. The myth of the neutral state was demolished. Feminism turned to other sides that matter to women's lives, and another thing that happens is in Hindutva, right? Feminism. One of the ideals of feminism is that women are victims. Women are, in some ways, women. You have an image of women which sort of circulates, which sort of contrasts with the fact when the Hindutva was one of the shocking things for was that Hindu women were actively collaborating with the Hindu men in inciting them to violence against Muslims. So this is now another, it sort of breaks a kind of assumed solidarity of women, and gives you new things to think about. What is happening here? Women. We thought women are all one and united against their own oppression, and that the male, sort of the men and women, that kind of a thing, is sort of broken by the kind of agency that women assume within the Hindutva political space, and the discourse of incitement, which is an older discourse actually. It's a discourse of honor. If you go back to Sangam age, in Ramanujan's essay, we saw that Sangam, the Tamil Sangam literature, in that kind of honor society, it's customary for women to incite the men to go and avenge or to go and fight and so on. It's supposed to be part of their duty to tell the men. It's some kind of a built into that kind of social structure that they have the role to incite people to take arms, to fight, to be brave, to show their valor, and to bring honor to me as a mother. Like the mother's honor in some ways, or the wife's honor, depends on, if the man turns out to be a coward and refuses to fight and so on, it's a dishonor, right? Which brings dishonor. It's that kind of a thing. It's repeating itself in this modern context of Hindutva in a bizarre kind of way.
Can you say more about this account of Indian feminism in a kind of larger picture?
The Indian feminism.
Yeah. Is it a feminist organization on the ground? Or
Yeah, well, you see, Indian feminism, one of the ways in which the story is told is, in the 70s, there is a group of, a panel, a committee is set up, sort of, to report on gender issues. It is called, it's a very important document of Indian feminism. It is the first official document of Indian feminism. Even today it's cited as the beginning of Indian feminism. It's a document called Towards Equality, a report. And the women, Veena Majumdar, Lotika Sarkar and so on, they were part of this panel, and they wrote a very elaborate diagnosis of the gender related issues in India, what needs to be done, etc. And more recently, it's turned out that report was actually submitted, and it was Indira Gandhi during Indira Gandhi's time, and it sort of was buried. It was not, but it's now available, and it's widely used as a sort of classic of feminism. So that is one of the beginnings. And now this Towards Equality report is classically a document which is state-sponsored document. It's like you can set up a committee to look into the problems of the slum area, right? It's what the state does to as a welfare measure, governmental activity. In a similar sort of spirit, the Towards Equality report is a policy document. So Indian feminism has its beginnings in this kind of policy related agency. So while the men are taking the responsibility for other kinds of developmental activities, women have produced this document which is meant for the amelioration of women's condition. So in that sense, it has, it falls in line with a series of this. So Indian feminism then remains more or less within that framework for that in that period, right, 70s onwards. But in the late 80s or so, roughly, I think with Hindutva, Mandal, these struggles over representation, which gather momentum in the late 70s, 80s, and especially late 80s and definitely through the 90s. What happens is some of those, the developmental feminism is a kind of, the state-oriented feminism is also extremely, in its own way, extremely socially conservative. So, for instance, sexuality issues are not of great importance to them. They suppress those issues. They're not, it's all about, family welfare and girl child and her, and so on. All the good issues, not those things which relate to women's feminine agency, as the freedom question. So they're not. It's not freedom so much as well-being that is the object of the early phase. But in the later phase, in the 90s onwards, people start questioning these kind of assumptions, and so they, it sort of widens and also breaks into different types of factions. And another question that comes into it is the caste question. So I think, the core question of solidarity of women and whether, it is broken by whether caste, makes a difference at all. How can you claim that women are all one across caste divisions? Because what about, the upper caste woman is obviously in a position of empowered position. And the upper caste women are in such a position that they are able to take up these kinds of report writing and governmental activities, right? Whereas caste differences are crucial. Another issue that comes up is, if you take a look at the social practices of different castes, the worst practices are actually characteristic of upper castes. So, for instance, the prohibition of widow remarriage, it exists only among the upper castes. In lower caste masses, there is no such thing. Women can do remarry, but although it's a problem of a small minority, it seems to be the problem of all of India. Right? This widow remarriage sort of question. So those kinds of questions come up. So there is a flowering of different kinds of organizations, proliferation of sort of movements and so on, and fierce argumentation within these circles, left feminism and more anti-left or non-left sort of voices, and governmental versus independent, right? Sort of there's a kind of splintering, but in a productive way, because it is giving rise to much more rich sort of arguments in the field, and that's basically the situation in which. So there are apart from that, there are apart from the Towards Equality report, there are you might say people like Tanika Sarkar, Mary John, Susie Taru and Tejaswini Niranjana, and more on the sexuality sort of side of the issues, Shohini Ghosh, Ratna Kapoor, and so on. There now a whole Nivedita Menon, whole range of feminists with different viewpoints. It's not like those early days when there was such a consensual sort of idea of what feminism is all about. So that's the dilemma of feminism. So the contrast, she says, between feminism's low-key response to Phulan Devi and her widespread popularity among the masses as a type of female heroism, almost a female goddess image. So there is a difference. She is sort of making here a distinction between the mainstream feminism and what she calls populist feminism. Indian feminism's reluctance to embrace militant feminist models, suspicious of singular figures. So, militancy, as as you were saying earlier, militant feminism is not something that is approved of, So, because it's a question of, in a way, it's a question of class agency also. Feminist agency overdetermined by class agency. That's it's the agency of the women of a particular class rather than women in general. So diversity of voices is always a threat to that position. So in a way, this is a critique, Sundarajan's critique of feminism. I mean, it's a self-critique in that sense of a person who belongs to the movement, saying it is feminism's failure to connect to Phulan's oppression, and that it's sort of mired in this victim feminism idea, that it only deals with those who are passively asking for justice rather than those who are strong enough to fight back.
Indira Gandhi's role in this, what's her role in the feminism?
No, Indira Gandhi is not, this is the thing, Indira Gandhi is again a bit like Phulan Devi, right? She's a powerful woman. Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter, grown up power was for hers for the asking right from the start, and she takes on her rise to power is also it's a if you look at the 60s scenario when suddenly Indira Gandhi stages a split in the Congress, right? In that moment, the Congress is full of these old gentlemen. She is the only. There are other women, but they are all part of that old style, femininity, of nationalist femininity. The nationalist femininity is represented by people like Vijayalakshmi Pandit, Sarojini Naidu, and so on, who are great. One is a great poet, one was a great writer of, in other ways a diplomat, and so on. But they are part of this genteel class which rule the country, and they are not. While they had great concern, and they could not step out of that sort of world. Indira Gandhi comes from the same world, but she adopted an uncharacteristically authoritarian sort of policy, right? She sort of completely broke the old guard's hold on the Congress. She appealed to the bureaucracy. She got the bureaucracy behind her, and the Congress system. We discussed the Congress system earlier. It's like one tree in which as you go down, there are these traditional figures of authority who are continue to serve the Congress. So there is a kind of staggered sort of representational system there, right? Because the person at a village level who is voting not by directly looking at the candidate, but by what the local patron says, right? So basically voting for that person in a way. That person is representing the higher person, and so on. So it's all these gentlemen, these zamindars, these rich farmers, these bureaucrats, and professionals, and so on, who constitute this kind of system. Indira Gandhi breaks through it, and she is celebrated in her time, actually. For instance, this painter M.F. Hussain, a very is a renowned painter now, who recently died, he drew these paintings of her as goddess Durga. Like a goddess who is a powerful figure of power, right? And so on. So there has been that kind of she was extremely sort of charismatic figure in spite of her shaky voice and so on. She was not she was exemplary in the sense that she was a singular, like that's why I said like Phulan, because there is a singularity to it. She is not amenable to this kind of absorption into a feminist discourse, right? It's a very
But do the feminists support her, for instance, or the constitution?
no, because her politics was anti-democratic, because she declared emergency, right? So that's the thing. I mean, and not it's not so easy to say that it's anti-democratic, because in some ways she was actually breaking that system in order to make the polity much more basically mass politics, right? So that it's not about elderly people telling you how to vote. That system she broke. In that sense, she did something positive for democracy, but then she imposed emergency, then put her in a very negative. And this Towards Equality report is done in her time, during her regime. So in that sense, there was a positive element in how people saw her at that point, but then it quickly changed because of the atrocities of the emergency, which came to light in 1977, became public knowledge about how people had been put in jail, tortured, and forcible vasectomies and tubectomies were conducted, and those kinds of horror stories came up. And so retrospectively, everybody disowns Indira Gandhi in that way, right? It's not
It's
So
like the analysis of this essay, which dimension of Indira Gandhi, sort of, it's overdetermined, but nevertheless, she's probably even by now the most powerful ever, right, in Indian political history.
yeah,
The most powerful woman, or as a political figure.
even as a political figure, nobody in India, no prime minister, not even Jawaharlal Nehru, had assumed that kind of power over everything. That
Which you put on the international or comparative term, especially for India, in the sense that given the reality, keep saying this is something, even with bandits, right, and coexist with the reality. This is a powerful women,
right.
in Indian politics, and somehow there's certain contradiction.
No, that is a South Asian story. Sirimao Bandaranaike in Sri Lanka, Indira Gandhi and Jayalalitha and any number of women, many women in India, Mayawati, Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan, Khalida Zia and Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh. You have it's a place where there have been number of women leaders who have become prime ministers, presidents, and so on. Now this is something extraordinary, but at the same time, what is it about? They are all, no, not all of them, but most of them are related to men who died or retired and had to and whose power they inherited. Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter, right? Sirimao Bandaranaike is the wife of Bandaranaike, and Bandaranaike dies, and Sirimao Bandaranaike becomes a Sri Lankan president. Benazir Bhutto is Bhutto's daughter, Zulfikar Bhutto's daughter. Khalida Zia is the Bangladeshi Zia somebody, his wife. Sheikh Hasina is Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's wife, and so on. So you have that, it's that kind of a thing, it's power which is passed on to women from a male who previously was influential in politics. So in itself, it doesn't sort of say something about women's empowerment. You can't read that as it's an indication, but it can be read, this is my opinion, as an indication of the general sort of difference in terms of the standing of women in the family, within a family. That is, within the family, in many Indian communities, at family level, women have their own sort of autonomy of a particular kind. It's not that it's patriarchy exists. In spite of that, there is a certain kind of authority that they do have, which is what is manifested in some ways in these extraordinary stories. So they are not women in public life, that is in everyday public life, right? You don't see, it's very difficult to, women are oppressed everywhere, and women are treated as inferior everywhere, and so on. Within family circles, so this is where a family, when it reaches a position of power, that family is quite happy. See, that family doesn't think twice about letting the wife or daughter become, enter public life. There is that. So that means within the family there's already a certain kind of liberty that's possible, right? Whatever the logic. But it cannot manifest itself it hasn't so far in everyday normal life. So there you find that the women's position is among the worst in the world, the very, very oppressed situations. And so that's the
You mentioned Pulan actually the recognition, you feel strongly in a way identified because of recognition from Indira Gandhi. It's mentioned in the the essay.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense, the reputation is also built by the who comments on you, right? If you, Indira Gandhi herself has something to say, right? The point is that up till that point, until the late 70s, everybody saw dacoity as a social phenomenon, as a symptom of social injustices, right? And Indira Gandhi is no exception. Everybody saw it. And in fact, Rajeswari Sundarajan also mentions the other thing, which is today they tend to treat them as criminals, but even today they will not treat them as criminals when they actually caught. They will somehow make a special arrangements for them. And there is a kind of inbuilt perception that they are some different from ordinary criminals.
How about the Dalit Queen? She just read the news about the Dalit Queen elected by the people. Those Dalit people they donate money to her, then she got elected in the local political entity. But she just like very corrupted, and she got the ticket to fly to the other country to buy sandals, slippers.
Oh, this is Mayavati. No, yeah, well, she's not a yeah, I haven't heard this expression, Dalit Queen, but yes, Mayavati, whom I just was mentioning earlier, is, Mayavati is interestingly, she is not a dynastic figure. She is not somebody's wife or daughter. But she had a patron in the sense that she was in a party, she was a member of the party, founding member of the party, which was started by a senior colleague of hers called Kanshiram. But Kanshiram was the founder of the party, but when his party won the elections, he did not take up the position of chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, which is one of the biggest states in India, the biggest state in India. But his second, number two in the party was this woman called Mayavati, who became the chief minister. And in fact, she became the chief minister one more time. So she has had a long stint in power. And she is a Dalit. She represents her party is a party which has taken on representation of the Dalits in a strong way, and has had a huge success in that one state and very minor success in some other parts. Yes, she is certainly an exception to this idea of that unless you are connected to some family, you can't. Right. Yes, yeah, she had, yeah, there's something about her shoes and her wealth, the wealth that she has accumulated and so on.
Documentary. It's about Dalit women. There's a leader, female leader.
Yeah, I think I've read about it as well. Pink. These women wear pink and then
This is the pink
color.
Oh, pink chaddis. You went to pink chaddis. Is that the one?
The Gang of Pink.
Yeah. It's that was more recent. It's not Dalit. It is not Dalits. No, it's not. It's well, what it is it was it's there is a very Hindutva type of organization in one part of Karnataka, in South India, which goes around beating up couples on Valentine's Day if they are seen together, right? They feel it's some against Indian culture, so they go around trying to, and so they keep doing this. And so some women, this is online activism. Some women got together as a group and they said everybody should send one pink panties, to this person, this party, So there was a flood of pink panties being sent to. So it became sort of a way of protesting. By saying, yeah. So that's So yeah, this is the story of Phulan. So the feminism story is, of course, the other part of the story is. We went over the Hobsbawm bit. So another question is, of course, Phulan's agency. To what extent was she actually acting as an independent agent and entering into a negotiation and making contact? To some extent, she is, in the sense that she is asking for certain rights, but on the other hand, you feel that it's there is an overwhelming sort of she's surrounded by such a powerful force that in some ways her agency is muffled to a certain extent because afterwards she doesn't have full freedom to. Conclusion is that Phulan sought out the nation space to negotiate freedom and justice for herself. State's resources offer her an avenue for escape. The law, though flawed, is an option that is available to her, right? That is, in other words, she's saying that there is something positive in this negotiation for Phulan also, because she ensured her family's safety and relief. So, in other words, the state is something you cannot do without. That's Rajeswari Sundar Rajan's conclusion. Now, subaltern studies issues. I think we can take up some of those, maybe after the break, or because those kinds of issues, like Dipesh Chakravarti brings up, those are very interesting to sort of place. Both the political society argument of Partho, which we already touched upon, and this other idea of representing, somehow that the historian has to let the subalterns speak for themselves. That idea, to what extent that. So the Birsa Munda case, which is very interesting, I think we can discuss that as a. Before we come back to Phulan.
The reception of her political government or rule, how is it nowadays?
Yeah, by and large, it's negative.
Yeah, because of the state of
emergency.
The time of emergency.
Yeah, that was the main thing.
Many people were slaughtered. It's known afterwards, or it's known at the time?
No, at that time, very few people knew about it.
Yeah, that's what
because the press was censored.
Sure.
There was you couldn't report on anything.
Case, everywhere.
Yeah. So it's only after, once she declared elections and lifted the emergency, then all the news started coming out, all the tortures and the forced sterilizations and all of those came out. So it was quite a dramatic sort of thing. And she lost that election.
Economically, how did she do?
She made certain.
Positive.
See, one of the things she did was she nationalized a lot of banks in that period. Big banks which are in private hands, so they were nationalized. Series of them.
Good for the state.
Huh?
It will be good for the state.
Yeah, I mean they became.
Yeah.
They became so the bank. Two things happened. One is that banks, whatever revenue the banks had, would feed into the government's programs. And secondly, the loaning. It became possible to give out credit to farmers and poor people. On a less, more in terms of a welfare-oriented loan sort of programs and so on.
So that's good.
Yeah. No, they were good. That's a good thing. So her reputation is based on the denial, the curtailment of freedoms, freedom of speech, press freedoms, and these kinds of atrocities. See, there were many, like for instance, forced sterilization. it was not necessarily a
Forced what?
sterilization, tubectomies, and
Okay.
men were, there was a kind of incentive system. There's this whole, Salman Rushdie has a story about it called the transistor radio. So if you underwent operation, you got a radio or some other thing, thing. But in many places, people were forcibly brought to the camps and forced to undergo these operations. That was one. Many of these things were done under the leadership of her son, Sanjay Gandhi.
Yeah.
He was a really notorious, character who used state power, and he was not even in any official capacity, but just because he was a party youth congress, the youth wing of the party, he was the leader, and he and many people like him, others, who always implemented many programs with a certain violence, which was, finally, remained. It became much more prominent than the other things that were done. There were, economically, yes, there were programs, and lasting effect is that breaking the Congress system. That was one, completely.
Breaking the system.
Congress, the old, patron system that Congress, politics was dependent on. She broke the back of that, and that old guard, they just crumbled. They had no way to go, and so they started. They joined the opposition parties, and so since.
Why did she break it? The Congress system.
That's why she appealed directly, mass appeal, right? For the first time, for the first time, like voting for Indira Gandhi. So whoever your candidate may be, Congress people were winning not because people voted for this candidate, but they voted for Indira Gandhi.
So they would say populist.
Populism, yeah. So she in that way, the whole that tree, the patron system, was completely disabled by that. So it's really the beginning of modern mass politics in that way, populist sort of measures and so on.
Very close to Mao's.
Yeah, I mean, in a mild way, it was of that kind.
Shatter the bureaucratic system and
Right.
mobilize popular support.
She was using the bureaucracy for this. So it was against the party system. The party had the tentacles all over, right? So the bureaucracy is more of a developmental sort of agency.
Yeah.
So she is using the bureaucracy to, so in other words, the party machinery is sidelined and the bureaucracy is directly sort of engaged in developmental activities. So in that sense, she really mobilized the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy became this like agency of change, in that way. And that also led to further misuse of bureaucratic power and all that. So, it's a...
Bureaucracy, bureaucratic machine in India basically regarded as a neutral force or
Bureaucracy is by no...
Right system, management system, executive management system.
it's more than that. For example, I have
It's-
in mind, for instance, Japan. Japan's bureaucracy played active role.
Yeah. India also, it's
The
a very
political
active.
Party, political platform, dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So the bureaucracy sometimes
Well,
build
how-
alliance with the popular forces sometimes
Mm.
in Japan. Right?
Bureaucracy doesn't have that kind of an alliance with popular forces, but in India, Indian bureaucracy. First, most important point about the Indian bureaucracy is it is not dismantled after independence. There's continuity.
That's
So-
interesting.
that is one of the biggest, in retrospect, the critical, sort of writing on it says this is the source of a number of problems. So, in other words, the developmental programs of the colonial state continue, that whole mentality, the same thing continues in the, so the bureaucracy is not rebuilt from, scratch to reflect new realities. So, it remains as a kind of power from the pre-independence period in the new.
How is the situation of the continuity between pre-modern bureaucratic system and modern state colonial bureaucratic system? That is a local governmental infrastructure. How was it?
Yeah, to some extent it is there, because the British system initially recruited from the upper castes. And the upper castes, especially the Brahmins and the Kayasts, two communities, they were the traditional bureaucrats in monarchic regimes and and so on. So they obviously moved into this thing to that extent. But in terms of their sensibility, they did not remain within the old framework. They were remade by the British, sort of, because English education and other things. So they constitute themselves in a kind of modern sort of bureaucracy, breaking with that old logic. But at the same time, in independent India, they become a class with interests of its own. So in fact, that is how the continuity plays into their hands, right? So they continue to wield social power. And many things in independent India, many policy decisions, etc., are in some way directly or indirectly favoring that class. So it's this class which has the bureaucrats, the professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers, that whole Anglophone class, which is they are common. In the same families there will be doctors, or lawyers, politicians, and bureaucrats, and so on. So that coming together of interests of this class, and to have the bureaucracy in your hands is like completely dominate. For instance, one of the scandalous things in independent India is primary education was completely left to the people's devices. National primary education implemented strictly, universal education, etc., was neglected completely. So you see this amazing phenomenon, which is higher education gets more funding, more resources than primary education, because for this class they need subsidized education at the higher level, where it becomes costly, right? Technical and other kinds of education. They don't need, so universal education is neglected, and in fact many people who write on the planning history of India basically say that this was a deliberate class move to deny education to the vast masses, because the competition, it meant competition. So in a way the bureaucracy maintained its a kind of aristocratic privileges for itself by these kinds of strategic moves, in policy decisions, which actually reduced competition from the larger.
Universal education cannot be policy decision, right?
Cannot be?
Cannot be policy decision by the bureaucrat. It must be, if you write in constitutionally,
It is
they have to implement.
No, they can't. This is the thing, they don't implement, because it's a matter of budgets. How much money are you allocate?
Constitutionally, it's set there.
Is constitutionally it is there. So that's the I mean, for instance, the other thing is language. Constitutionally it says something, but the bureaucrats refuse to follow. So they act as a class in that way. They maintain.
It is powerful.
It is very powerful. Anyway, so yeah, so to get back to this, yeah, those 2 points, which might be of interest to broaden this, to sort of put this in the context of larger other arguments. One is the political society question. This the way in which the state is constantly having to negotiate with various kinds of independent powers or independent communities or interest groups, etc., on a kind of equal footing, because they will not easily submit to state reasons, to legal provisions, and the unfolding drama of that kind of a thing. The other is what I was mentioning is that the question of the subaltern. It's interesting because this one of the classic examples of the subaltern, which is cited by Dipesh Chakravarti but also discussed by other people, is this tribal leader called Birsa Munda. Mundas are the tribe. There's a tribe called Mundas, and Birsa Munda is one of those who rose in revolt against British rule. Not on an all India level, obviously, but in his region. Right? It's a kind of uprising, and he was tried for his activities, and at that time he said, God told me to oppose, and so on. I mean, it was his way of saying whatever it is. And one of the arguments Dipesh Chakravarti has put forward is to say that history writing tends to diminish the voice of the subaltern by treating this statement, a statement like God told me to do this, as just a thing, because the secular historian sort of reads it in a different way, right? And that it's necessary to give, to take Birsa Munda at his word. In other words, to give full play to the voice of the subaltern. Which of course Birsa Munda's example is from colonial times, whereas our Phulan Devi is from the 80s, right? 70s, 80s, when she is active as a dacoit and then surrenders, etc. And the question, of the voice of the subaltern, if applied in the case of Phulan Devi, sort of, I think Rajeswari Sundarajan raises the question: what was her agency in this? How was she? To what extent was she acting as an independent agent in negotiations? Was she free to act, and was she acting in freedom, or was she actually, in some way, was her agency already compromised by the time she, even before she came to the negotiating table? That kind of a question. And whether there is anything in the voice, in what Phulan Devi says, which might be challenging state reason, because her actions certainly did, right? She was a dacoit, but her words at the time of surrender, what were they? So, in that sense, there is interestingly a complete silence on that front. There is nothing she was not a very vocal, she did not give any speech there. And even after she became a MP, she was not speaking in that kind of a voice that you might say that she is sort of somehow taking on a representational role vis-a-vis other people like her, the oppressed of the country. Now, you don't find much evidence of that. But of course, she won the elections, and twice she won, and part of it is obviously that kind, even though she doesn't speak that language, there is a representational, sort of identification which obviously is at work. But it seems that somehow in the context of this change of context from colonial to independent, the position of the subaltern also undergoes a transformation. So in other words, the question that occurs to me in relation to it is the definition of the subaltern in the subaltern studies framework applicable on both sides, in both contexts, or only in the colonial context? Right? That's because it seems that once you have citizenship as a framing sort of concept, the question of the state versus the subaltern somehow doesn't, so somehow seems difficult to think about in the same terms. So what happens to the subaltern in independent India, is a question that. So what has happened in terms of subaltern studies approaches is generally to treat subaltern as a more as a social category than as a relational category. That is, poor people, working class people, tribal people, lower caste people as a category. Those, and so on. And while, as we saw, for Indian feminism, for instance, it will relate to the subaltern in a developmental language, right? As somebody who needs succor, somebody needs developmental concern, care, and welfare measures, and so on. Whereas some writings inspired by the subaltern studies kind of framework would want to see more, you see it in a different framework, which is the rebellion framework, let us say. Subaltern as a rebel figure, right? Subaltern as somebody who rises against injustice, and so on. But the context having changed, this rebellion is no longer sort of, you can't, there is a difficulty obviously in speaking about rebellion against the Indian state, the independent Indian state, right? In the sense that you are, unless you are, sort of some kind of a seditionist kind of, seditious kind of figure, sort of argument. What you are saying, so what then happens is the two become abstracted from the context of India. In colonial India, it's the concrete context of colonialism, British colonial power and the subaltern. In the post-independence context, what seems to happen is that it's not India that is any longer the issue, but the state in its abstractness. The state versus subaltern, the people, So it's only insofar as it's an abstract conception of the state that the argument seems to hold. Whereas even in Dipesh Chakravarti's arguments, it's not you don't any longer talk about actual, for instance, you don't talk about the Kashmiri struggle as a subaltern struggle, right? Because the Kashmiris are struggling for an independent state. So that somehow you can't see subalternist sort of logics in operation there. So you have basically what it's something that is still in a thought that is developing for myself, but it seems that in some ways even as the subaltern is being identified again and again in terms of categories like lower caste or tribal, etc., the subaltern is becoming more and more integrated into the state's discourses through developmental schemes and other logics of the state, and so on. And citizenship and the increasing sort of criminalization of the subaltern. So even this meaning, which we were talking about in this context, we're saying the dacoit is always treated as somehow special, not common criminal, right? Something because of the perception of that it's a social rather than a criminological sort of phenomenon. It's a criminal phenomenon. I think what's happening today is that it is moving towards total criminalization of that sector, right? The Indian state in the last 20 years has really moved, and some of the latest developments where Naxalites, for instance, are being hunted down, right? There's an Operation Green Hunt or something like that, which is now mobilizing police, army and all kinds of forces, special forces, to comb the forests and eliminate. Whereas until very recently, even though there were skirmishes, encounters, etc., governments would try to hold talks with them, try to bring them to the table, to negotiate, to make them join the mainstream, etc. Now the approach is to comb the forests, to find and eliminate this, and it's increasingly criminalized. It's increasingly treated as pure criminality. And voices which are speaking up against that kind of criminalization are becoming less and less influential. There was a time when the intelligentsia in general would sympathize with this class of Naxalites or tribal rebellion and so on. No longer is it so much. It's become more and more of the sections of the intelligentsia are supporting state action to eliminate and so on. So that's the sort of
becoming Hobsbawm description.
Yeah, it's moving towards that, and which brings another interesting theoretical issue to the fore, which again Dipesh Chakravarti mentions, which is this kind of strange position occupied by the Indian historian or intellectual in general, which is that a kind of perspectival problem, if you like, optical sort of problem, which is that you have seen something happen in Europe, right? So when things happened in Europe, that is, people were uprooted from the villages, thrown out, of farmlands, left without no jobs and forced to go to the factories and work, right? This is the story of English industrialization in England, is the enclosures which, sort of deprived people of employment in the rural areas, and they en masse they migrate to the factories wherever there are factories, and they become workers, right? Because they have nothing to lose. As Marx said, they were free in both senses. That is, they were no longer bound to the land. They were free, to go anywhere they wanted, but they were also free of all property. They're nothing. So they were forced to find employment. So all this happens, and and if you read the history of it, like Conditions of the English Working Class, Engels, or any history of that whole process, it's a history of atrocities, great injustices, right, cruelty and so on. But it's happened, and then the historian comes and writes about the injustices of the past. But today the British, the state, is a new place with citizenship, freedom for all of the British people, right, or the French people or the German people and so on. And so in retrospect you can say that was a bad time, right? But what we now have is good. So, Chakravarti's point is, but in India, you stand in a place where you know that history, and you then are witnessing something of that history happening before your eyes, and one narrative says, okay, so just as they reached this modern, happy present, we will also reach that present, and therefore we need not criticize what is happening today, because it's moving towards that goal. Right? It's a peculiar dilemma. What are you saying? Are you saying, suspend the judgment now because tomorrow it will all become okay? We will become a modern state and all the conflicts will end in nice parliamentary democracy, and we will all be on a new footing, and so on. So this intellectual's problem of seeing something happening which is historical, is contemporary, but you are supposed to see it in historical terms, right? A kind of problem of how, where you are positioned vis-a-vis. But how to break out of that? How not to think like that is the intellectual's dilemma in this kind of context. Right? I mean, is it that everybody secretly thinks like that? That it has to be done. Like, for instance, it happened in Calcutta that Singur, the West Bengal government, the communist government, took land from small farmers who all had little patches of land, right? Took the land from them, giving some small compensation, and gave the land to the Tatas to build a car manufacturing plant. So, Mamata Banerjee, the opposition party leader, mobilized all these farmers and other people and opposed this. She said, why give this land? Why take away the land from them? But it was a peculiar thing, because they were all small farmers. They were holding small bits of land, and that is who they were not owning them. Their owners were somewhere else, and they were not able to live on the money they got from this. But being peasants, they want to cling to that land because they have nothing else. But the economist says this is unviable, because the economist knows from other examples that small farmers will just live miserable lives, and they will not be able to do anything, and in the state's economy will suffer unless you industrialize. So the economist feels compelled to support the state move to acquire agricultural land for industrial use. But the farmer doesn't want to leave that land. So what do? You support the farmer, or you support the industrialization which will make Bengal a prosperous state? It was actual dilemma, right? So then people will come up with solutions like, give them jobs in the factory, these families which are uprooted by this process. One person in the family should be given a job, but the company refuses to have any prior promises of that kind. They're saying this, we can't already promise such things. That's not possible, because they want a clean sale. They just want to give whatever thing and finish it off and have the land, not have an obligation to give employment and all that things. So the state then intervenes, and the state, the people are asked, demand from the state that the state should give them compensation. And then people say, if you put cash in a peasant's hands, they will spend it, and within 1 year they will be again penniless. They will have no money, because they don't know how to handle cash. They just know how to survive on this little bit of land, somehow miserably, carry on with their lives. So this whole, the subaltern question here becomes extremely complicated, with all of these kinds of logics operating, conflicting with each other. And it seems that most intellectual positions are simply, bracket it out. and wait for the next stage, when it all gets resolved. So let the state do its repression. What can you do? You want to see the change and so on. Right? So it's like, you can't. Huh?
What do you say?
What do I say? I also do, I don't know the answer to that question. I think these are equally difficult positions, but I think there is a way that you can work towards a consensual issue, towards a rough overall, state policy which is ameliorative, which is actually provides alternative land, for instance, in some other place, or the state takes on some, at least for the two generations, some kind of promises of employment in other places. Because I would think that this blocking of industrialization has led to suffering only in Bengal. There's no way out for these people, and so socially also it becomes a stagnant society, because they end up as domestic servants in Calcutta, and their lives continue to be on the same level, and this land is not theirs.
But this level, I think, is easier. It's the abstract issue you brought out.
Yeah.
Is more difficult.
That's the more difficult. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How do you? But one way to enter into the debate is actually to raise the issue: what is the guarantee? If there is any guarantee, right?
Right.
Assuming that narrative is the way to go. But what is the guarantee? Where is the guarantee coming from? It's almost like this is keep coming, this issue, whether sort of temporality issue, we're behind.
Yeah.
Now we're catching up.
Catching up.
with the
Yeah.
narrative, right? Which is that issue is severely problematized by now, I think, right?
Mm.
So you can't say there is a guarantee. But if it didn't happen in 1 century, 2 centuries, then whose responsibility?
Yeah. No, of course there are no guarantees that this is going to go in one way.
Yeah.
But obviously they are thinking about the state's position vis-a-vis others. So the only thing people can do is to say policies should be stronger. Policies for when alienation of property happens, there should be proper measures to ensure stability for their lives in some other context. That's all that is the best that has been suggested. No other, because anything else is not possible to suggest.
I think you can enter into this debate. Because it's also happening here. People taking away the land, they say they want to build science park.
Yeah.
And tremendous, but these are the people who are owning the land, of course. But even that is moral pressure on these leftover. If there are 500 owners, eventually 10 insist on having their own. Eventually they driven out. And so on.
No, in concrete cases there is always some, because for instance this particular case, they didn't have to give that land, because that was fertile land. There is a lot of land which is not so fertile, which is not being agriculturally used also, which you can give. But they want this land. And this is where the problem arises, right? I mean, in that particular case, there is a concrete solution, which is to give another piece of land, which should have been done earlier, not later, because after all this thing. Because that factory finally was not allowed, and they went to Gujarat, where Narendra Modi, this Hindu leader, he freely gave them land, and that's where the plant has come up. So so now the Bengal new government, the Mamata Banerjee, who opposed Singur, is now the chief minister, and now she is saying, telling the Tatas, please come back and start, and I will give you facilities. So this is the thing, it's not like she is opposing the entire thing. She is opposing only that because,
So Tata is like a Korean Samsung.
yeah, big,
So, especially hitting with what do you do with Samsung? I mean, this is a global brand for India,
Yeah, Tata's Birla.
right? So there's another contextual problem.
So the science park is also dislocating farmers.
But this science park, this is the public
Yeah,
in that sense, right? Public investment rather than
right.
corporate.
Mm.
There is a difference.
Yeah.
Also, is underground linkage.
No, but in India, the tech parks, which are the same sort of thing, they are public investment, but they are meant for private use, private companies to come and operate there. And one of the scams in India is that a private company is invited to take a place in the tech park, right? Now, to set up a unit, supposing they need 200 acres, but they will demand 2,000 acres. And when you acquire land for this purpose, you can give them 200 acres. That's a different thing. But they actually demand and they actually get 2,000, and they use the rest of the land for their own other kind of commercial use and so on. So that land has been bought cheaply from some farmer, and as soon as it gets into these hands, its price goes up massively, right? 100 times and so on. So these kinds of things are, same, yeah.
The recent controversy over the Taipei city government, Xindian subway station building, say, cheaply collected
Yeah.
from the whatever, then so eventually become real estate.
Mm-hmm.
But it was supposed for public use.
Supposed to be for public use, exactly.
But then they use for real estate. So this is a big scandal.
That's
The
what
only
is
difference is India has a lot of land to be given away.
right.
Where Taipei.
Right. Yeah. That's So yeah. So the question of the voice of the subaltern becomes interestingly complicated there. What kind of mobilization can actually ensure justice for them? Can mobilization on the basis of a autonomous subaltern voice which speaks its own language, is it capable of responding to the kind of challenges of this kind of policy moves and this nexus between private interests and state, which is developing?
But in her case, how should I say? She is not an individual, right? She has a group.
She has a group, yeah. The bunch of them surrendered, yeah.
So the group must, I think in that sense, different, sort of the individual relation. Because the image you have with it, if you use the term subaltern, you don't think in terms of the individual, right?
Right, yeah.
In terms of
Yeah, but none of them is individual. Even the farmers, they can only act as a group. Otherwise, there is nothing. What can is good. Yeah, it's a group activity because the identity is always given as group identity. The farmers of Singur, not one particular one. In many cases, in other places, there are many. Like there is a road which is being built, and the road is built all across like this, and from this side all across like this, or the full road is over except one small thing, because some farmer there has gone to court. That also happens. So in that sense you can resist, but in the language of modern legal sort of measures, right? So he's gone to court using the law to, so in that sense it's an individual action by somebody. which seems in some ways to delay the process. So he gets a bargaining power, he can claim more or whatever the thing is. There is some amount of leeway for individual interests to express themselves in the language of the law. But that's it's a wearing out. It's a game of you go on arguing, and finally they has to yield. But in the process would have gained something, maybe more money or whatever. But that's a different kind of person, because that person is the owner of the land, as opposed to the peasants in Singur, because they are tillers, they are not the owners. And so basically what I am saying is, in the present context, organizing to ensure justice in a modern way, learning to live in the modern context, right, by becoming savvy about new strategies of the powerful, right, that in some ways seems to conflict with the logic of subaltern ideology in a way, because it seems to put more emphasis on traditional modes of protest and resistance, which don't seem to work in this context.
It's not easy to enter especially the first question you raised in Deepa's about contextual shift.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether there's even agreement within the subaltern study.
No, there isn't. I mean, it's just one, yeah. No.
I mean, if you take the subaltern thing from Gramsci, then the Italian condition wasn't that, right?
Yeah.
And then it is a relational term. In that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Fluid, very fluid. But you can pinpoint exactly during the British India period, which are the group, then what gets shifted
Right.
in the independence era. But it doesn't mean they don't exist in the new situation. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Then some of the notion you can pinpoint would be like, you use a term like citizenship. That's in a way easier. You say who has the ID card, right, in the colonial period, then to the independent era. Otherwise, bearing even the same ID card doesn't mean there is no differences
Yeah.
within the category of
Yeah.
identity. So in that sense, subaltern in relation to the dominant, to the powerful, it's always shifted. Depends on the right. I mean,
No, see, there are two. I mean, here there are two paradigms of subaltern existence. Let's say, one is subaltern existing in substantial autonomy from the state, right? So the tribal, Pulan, the bandits, etc. Right?
Pre-modern state.
Yeah, in a pre-modern kind of.
This is the assumption of the modern state, almost across the board, trying to monopolize.
Exactly.
Right?
So that's the context.
Right.
So there is
So
a.
in that sense, the colonial state
becomes transitional, and the paradigms then are those who maintain a pre-modern autonomy and those whose subalternity is reconstituted within the terms of the state. So the working class is a, so that's why the working class is a category which is subaltern within the terms of a modern state reason, whereas the tribal and the dacoit are subalterns in the in a different kind of sense, right? And that is the essence of the Indian way of defining the subaltern, is more emphasis on that rather than this. more emphasis on the tribal and the other kinds of resistances which are outside of the logic of the state. You know, Gayatri Spivak's, for instance, essay on the Draupadi, right? The tribal woman who confronts the police, that, you know, there's a story which that is about somebody who's outside of the purview of the state, whom the state confronts and who resists from outside, you know. And so the whole idea is that the independence of that gesture, the agency coming from its own internal source, right? So that is the distinctiveness of the subaltern definition within the Indian subaltern studies framework, which in some ways is moving away from, or not sort of locating subalternity within the rationality of the modern state, where you can be working class, you can be unemployed, you can be homeless, you can, these new categories, right? So these are the two paradigms of subalternity, right? And Gramsci is working within that paradigm, whereas the Indian subalternists using the same terms are actually redefining them in this kind of context. So that's where the question of how that framework then works within an independent Indian state, where the state is relentlessly sort of redefining the space in many different ways. And one of the points that Rajeswari Sundarajan is making is, this redefinition is not happening in a smooth way according to some established model, but because the state is actually entering into negotiations, so it is actually not a repetition of some classical model. Even though it is encroaching on those lives, the terms on which it is doing so and the actual results of that encounter are somehow different. But
that's problematic.
That's problematic.
Yeah,
Why?
So-called negotiation actually still is a sort of buying her into the system.
Into the system.
Yeah, she follows the
Right.
system already.
Yeah.
Now, I was thinking similar to that, because we were talking about there's a woman parrot in Qing Dynasty. It's a very famous one. And later on became parrot.
Really? A pirate too?
Right. Woman parrot. She actually inherited, of course, her husband, a man parrot. True, but she increased it and she became very, very powerful. And then the Qing government wanted her to buy her in, and then and this and that. So she gained a great fortune. But this is just a story. I was thinking of this transition between the pre-modern so-called local bureaucracy into the modern state bureaucracy, but the same local infrastructure, the power relation, and those social elite, intelligentsia, all these people who have a higher rank and great fortune, they would naturally become members in the parliament or Congress. That's the same in ROC after the revolution. So they could be 100, 200 or 300, 200, I think, members in the parliament, because there are 36 provinces that they want to represent. But all those are former, not only social elite, but those very wealthy and high-ranking people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why some people would criticize that it's just a new form of feudal system. But like in India, that was incorporated into the colonial system, bringing in this so-called Western European model of this parliament, and incorporate the traditional social relations or systems into this neo-European government system. And then after the independence, so it's still some sort of course the state of mind will be different, but it's still some sort of power inheritance relation. So so pre-modern, but pre-modern. Let's see. I was thinking. In pre-modern society, each society or province, they have their own military troops. Like Bandit, they have theirs, and for in traditional Chinese commercial groups, they have also their own military armed forces to protect.
Modern day bank security guard.
Yeah. Those were there always. Yeah.
徽商啊，什么镖局啊 they can go from north to south or
Yeah.
福州
The Banjaras, yeah.
But after the modern state, what changed is that they cannot own their own arms.
Mm.
And but when
US you can.
in the West they can.
In the US.
Yeah. But they submit their arms, but they in return they can own higher ranking position in the government. So negotiation, whether that already achieved a political society, I doubt it very much because it's a system that's working. That's one thing. The other thing would be this the subaltern issue that you mentioned that we cannot talk about it in terms of citizenship, right? Or when we talk about this the developmental logic, and then we cannot see it. And you were saying, or this historian's perspective, you were saying that if they maintain their pre-modern or tribal mode of existence, they could maintain some sort of autonomy. What you were suggesting that? No.
Yeah. So
we cannot talk about them as like workers, or because it's still already within the classification of modern state. So that is they turn out to be a labor, or it's already in the entire market system, or this production line, and their modes of life were already defined according to that modern state political economy, and they were already under the system of biopolitics. So how do we talk about, so it's not only caste, or the subaltern people, or the tribal people who were looked down upon, because it's a very complex question. So the question really would be the autonomy of each individual. But then those castes, they were being put aside because of some sort of prejudice, or some sort of a pre-existing bias or whatever. So that makes it more difficult. I'm thinking of two lines. But coming back to your point that this tribal existence, or this I don't know. What do you think?
So what I see there is a kind of leaning towards the affirmation of the pre-modern forms of resistance. Somehow pre-modern forms of resistance are seen to be more genuine, more authentic, carrying a real sort of, bearing a certain sort of autonomy, which is contrasted with the subaltern who is absorbed into a new paradigm, right?
None will be working, right?
Huh?
For you, neither paradigm could.
No, neither of these is essentially can be taken as by in itself. In the Indian case, I can say that in the Indian case, a number of the resistances that come up to the state reason are not coming from organized groups which operate according to the internal logic of the system. They are not. They operate according to all kinds of pre-modern logics. But that does not mean that their lives are not completely engulfed by the state. So, in some peculiar way, they are internal to the state logic, but not to a particular kind of reason that we associate with the state, right, which is the citizenship logic. So, because the citizenship logic exists, but it is not that. So, there is a state that engulfs the lives. Governmentality is basically the operative thing here, but it is not functioning according to citizenly reason, right? They all. So in the negotiation question, what is negotiation? Essentially, it means that the state itself is not, although everything about the state carries the echoes of the European model, right? Constitution, parliament, citizenship, laws, and codes of conduct and procedure, everything is there, but the state is not necessarily functioning with that. It's not that is the state. Now, whether we are moving towards that kind of a state is the final sort of thing. Are we in transition, that tomorrow will be like that, or is this a unique new form which is not, for which there is no model anywhere, and therefore you have to understand it for what it is today. That's the I feel that you have to be able to see what most people who will say is, it is not that, and I agree, it's not that. But having said that, people will say it is actually some Indian, some unique thing. It is different. So we are not able to see the truth because we are seeing through that logic. My position on this would be that this formation is a combination of elements. And so I don't want to say it's more traditional or more modern, but it's a combination of elements which are operating in unison, but their logics are clashing in different ways, and therefore you need to redescribe that reality in order to gain some conceptual grasp over it. And I think we are still struggling to do that. Yeah.
So the key is, how do you describe that?
How to describe it, yeah.
Or through historical analysis.
Yeah. So what happens is, in many writings, what they do is they say any description which uses Western these concepts of the modern state, European state concepts, is false. Now I say it cannot be false, because it's part of it's one of the ingredients, right? So one of the function of that ingredient is to assert that element, to claim its truth, right? So you have to be able to find a framework which encompasses both the claims and the other things, everything in the things. So you cannot dismiss the claims saying they are false, because the claims are part of the system, part of the operation of the whole.
True.
Right? Even in the lives of those who are marginal, these claims have a role. You see, the citizenship model is not actualized in the life, but it is there in the life as an ideal, right? So you can't take it out of, and then get a clear picture. So and that makes it much more complicated, difficult thing to. The redescription becomes,
This is the moment I think the differentiation of the level of analysis comes into the picture, right? Then you say citizenship. How does that operate? Right? Rather than say, at this point, using normative claim.
Yeah.
This is the right thing or wrong thing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does that enter the picture?
Yeah.
And so on. So you cannot, in a way, you have to deal with it. To what extent it operates, and why in certain context it suspends. And I think the dilemma is both historical analysis infiltrated contempt, I don't want to say, but I don't have a better term, with this normative claim. Right? That's one thing. The other thing is, in order to arrive at the picture, there will be another system for you to move back. Or to compare with. So otherwise you get sucked into the existing. You will not be able to really get into this massive battle.
Yeah.
So far I think that this is I think the problem of existing scholarship stops here. So to what extent like subaltern study able to? So in short, we're trying to pinpoint in a way, I don't know what is the articulation principles. All these this mixing of different systems together. Right? But how? Beyond the normative claim, or have to in a way suspend normative claim.
No, but I feel that normativity itself is an ingredient.
Of course, but then you need to say this is a normative, because it's normative, it function in what way?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Normative, not in the sense I think this is good, need to be function this way.
Sure.
That's what I mean, right? Or if this is not function that way, you ignore it. It's like what you're trying to say, the Marxist analysis. Do not see the notion of cost still working. Then you're escaping from reality.
Right,
if
yeah.
you don't like cost, that's another problem. Right? This is but how do they working together and so on. Yeah.
Yes, you have question or comment?
So if you track the specific group, I mean their formation and so on, how do people, not only through her, I think it's I don't want to say mistake, not enough analysis. If we're focusing on she herself.
Yeah. That's because, she is focusing also because it's a gender-related issue that she wants to extract from it.
Like a group, how did the group coming together?
Yeah, so that there is a brief background. It's not much, basically it goes back, it has a longer history of dacoities in that area. And these are people who, for whatever reason, leave home, go away, they are unemployed or they're poor or they are ostracized or whatever it is, they join these gangs. And, they then start living in these, some caves and other kind of natural settings in the, in that region, and somehow they bear arms, they have arms, and they establish regular, it's a kind of parallel taxation kind of thing on the villagers, extortion. So they go periodically and they demand grain and other things, and so in return they offer protection. Yeah, it's a regular bandit scenario.
Modern mafia.
Yeah, that kind of a thing. But at the same time, it has always had this thing that it is somehow about only, it is a social injustice that drives people to this kind of existence. And they also, the good, what gives them support is that they do intervene in the class relations within villages on behalf of the poor. So, for instance, zamindars, the big landowners, they have all kinds of privileges in a village, all kinds of sexual services they claim from peasant, or agriculture, poor women and so on, and exploitation, etc. So they tend to come in and intervene in some of those things against such things, by killing or by revenge, sort of things. So that's what gains them support. So because they also need secrecy, right? They need spies, they need people to collaborate, inform, and so on. So they develop a network like that. But in some cases, for instance, there is this is mainly a North Indian phenomenon, but recently, in the last 2 decades, there was a phenomenon like that in the south. Veerappan was this dacoit. He was a sandalwood smuggler. Sandalwood being very expensive, then there's a forest. So in that forest, this gang lived, and he would supply. But then it turned out that there were all kinds of links, because he can't go out and sell it and make money, right? And he is not even living a life where he can, enjoy any money that he has. What will he do with money in the forest, right? He is only living in the forest. So there are all kinds of politicians and other wealthy people who profit from this. So he is merely an agent for that. And he does all the other things that normal dacoits do, but he is actually functioning as a smuggler for a big network of criminal things. And it also turned out that there may have been a link to the LTTE, that is the Sri Lankan terrorist Tamil organization, that they were being funded by the revenue from this sandalwood smuggling and so on. But throughout this, he remains a very poor fellow. His wife lives in the town, and she sends the child to a very ordinary government school. She herself is a school teacher. They live in a small one-room sort of house, and so there's no. And then he became very famous because he kidnapped this big film star, and so on. So these kinds of
Coming back to this Paul and Debbie, so the reason that I question about this process of negotiation is that she in the end she didn't really speak for that people who were driven into this decor.
Yeah.
So so it's different from what we usually think of in terms of political negotiation. That is not not to be bought in, but to insist on local people's persisting need or necessity for livelihood and so on. So it's different. I mean, when we negotiate, your end or my end will win. That will make a difference, right? If I got myself bought into organized position with wealth and so on, and then of course I get better off. But I love my Yeah, so that is not negotiation. Negotiation is to insist on both these parties. We could say subalterns conditions or the life, the existence that's being deprived, and then has to be insisted. And then that's a process of negotiation, constant negotiation.
Mhm.
So that's why I thought about our case as a mode of a political society or through negotiation. So because that really happens to our repeats other modes of this transition or this continuation of pre-existing power structure into the next government or next state. You can always bargain. Negotiation, if it's not started from a local perspective, then it could be just a negotiation to get a better bargain. And farmers could also sell their land for
better bargain. Yeah, they're making better negotiation.
They protest and resist because they want a better buyer to come in.
No, that's the thing. If they are aware of the market, which is increasingly happening now, they realize but they were when they were actually selling, they did not know what is going to happen to this land. So they have a sense that this land is worth so much, right? If they say this land is worth 100,000 rupees per acre, right? If they get 100,000 rupees, they sell it. But they do not know that within 6 months, its value is going to go up to 10,000, 10 million. See, that is when the farmer is not negotiating with full knowledge of the conditions, the circumstances, the future, and so on. Right? They are not partners in this development project. Where they might say, okay, so much it's going to go up value, therefore, there's some share, a just share of what future benefits, right? So they are, first of all, they sell blindly. So in front of their eyes, somebody else resells after 6 months for 10 times the price. So what has happened here is, when it happens in private in transactions, it's different, right? But the government is doing it. The government is buying, not that the private entrepreneur is not buying directly, because then it's a private transaction, it's finished. Once you sell, if you sell and then you say, oh no, give it back, you can't, because it's a contract, the agreement has been signed. But the government is buying it and selling it, and knowing fully the government, he is not making these people, the sellers, a party to the whole process. It is basically shielding the entrepreneur from this from the seller, who might claim a greater thing if he knew what was going to happen to it, right? So that's the thing.
Sure. I think my question still is what is a real political society or political action that involved in both cases? For example, selling the land, if they knew and they get 10 times better than they are offered here, the price, and they can sell it. Whether that
no.
Political, no, right? Because
No. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. No, that's not. No.
Because if they get a larger picture of the market and so on, and they agree to sell it, not blindly but knowingly, whether that will make a better political society? No.
No. That's not the thing.
This instance did not involve political society.
No, that instance is not. Yeah, political society is not quite.
I'm still thinking because they are are suggesting that they call it revival of agricultural society, and they need to maintain the life, the community mode of the living. They want to maintain. They don't want to develop into urban or industrialized place. So they want to, so that is a political act.
No, but that act is happening in the context of all these developments as a way of undoing something, right? Of resisting something with full knowledge of what it means. It's not, quite the political society type of gesture or move. It's more to do with like a communistic or socialistic or even the Quakers and Shakers kind of movements, alternative movements. They think of a particular way of living which they want to insist upon for themselves and resist.
I'm not thinking of that.
Okay.
There's what is Amish people? No.
Okay. Amish, not Amish. Amish is traditional, but some of these were new, the Quaker type of developments, and you resist it with full knowledge of what the world is, how the world is going.
If this instance happened, these peasantry, even they don't own the land, but they resist to move, right? Work collectively.
Yeah.
This is the moment political society starts.
Yeah.
Or even they sold the
Or they
land.
claim the mode of living they prefer.
Yeah.
Or
Because of the
even-
village or the community.
Yeah, even they sold it, and the rice come up 100 times. This is the moment they come back.
They come back.
Say,
Yeah.
we claim
Right.
the share of
Yes.
the whatever
Yeah.
selling,
They do that.
right?
Yeah.
But unless you do that, there is no political negotiation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is no political.
They have to act collectively and demand, and then it becomes an issue. The government has to respond to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though they have actually signed away their land, they've actually signed the contract, but this is now a collective move, to reopen the case, kind of thing. Yeah.
But she's trying to, the author trying to draw certain analogy, to different things. But one probably too bad analogy to draw is, I'm actually thinking of modern mafia. When you think of like a Hong Kong cinema, it's mainly mafia.
Right.
And quite popular.
Yeah.
And they have their own share. But maybe for different reasons they exist. Right? And maybe less legitimacy than these ones. I don't know. So all these analogies depends on which direction you
Yeah, I mean, mafia can also sometimes adopt this Robin Hood thing, Yes.
Mafia has its own justice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gangsters, they all have their own justice.
No, but finally, in that sense, what is mafia other than a survival of the right of the landowner to judge the moral, criminal and other happenings within his land. See, the judge is a big landlord, right? So those Russian big landlords or Indian big landlords who owned huge amounts, like they were like kingdoms. They stretched several miles, right? And within that, if a peasant has a dispute with another peasant, or if a peasant has killed another peasant or murder or something like that, the case will be resolved within, it will not go to the state courts. This is your, that's the power of the landlord, and that power is given by the state also. The state recognizes the landlord's power to judge within his domain. Right? It's one particular kind of relation between powerful, wealthy people and the state, which enables him to be a sovereign within his domain and judge, and bring all cases will be resolved. It will not go outside, right? So from that you come to a new order in which even a purely domestic quarrel can go to court. That is husband and wife, parents and children, right? And that kind of an intimate issue can also go to court. That means the entire thing is recomposed, right? In such a way that the state is the only the state has the power to judge, to render justice. So this mafia and the other kinds of things, they are restoring or somehow continuing or reintroducing that older private domain where an individual or a group of people will do the justice, separate from the thing. And that's in some ways the fascination of it also is because of that, isn't it? It's kind of sovereignty within a sovereign state, and given the fact that human beings in general within such states have lost that sovereignty, it's a kind of nostalgia also for that which is at work there, isn't it? Those older sort of situations where the charismatic leader, so because these are traditional forms of authority which in some ways, even for those who are victims of such authority, there is a strange attachment to memories of that.
There's almost increasingly, how should I say, forces like that have to be there.
Yeah.
When you think about the disadvantaged subaltern population, right? Especially in India. Number one, what is the precondition you can take something to court? Right? Require, number one, literacy.
Yeah.
Number two, confidence to talk to clerk,
Yeah.
clergy,
Yeah.
right? But these conditions not there. Then how do you operate?
Yeah.
So it will be those who have something to do to claim justice will be the resourceful, right? And once the gap has always been there, then there's no other way out.
Yeah.
Right? Unless you have these other groups.
Yeah, that's where the mediating classes come into the picture, right? All those who mediate this relation, the educated. So that's the story of freedom.
So the argument can be, I'm talking about practical issues again. If the Constitution says you need to provide universal education, but it's not done, but there must be groups out there trying to push this unconstitutional. So if this kid cannot go to school, can I take him to the constitutional court? Right?
No. See, this is not how it works. What happens is the budget is not there, right? So you have a school somewhere. And no, in many places there are no schools also, but they don't, how will they, first of all, many people don't want their children to be educated because they want them to work in the fields and make money and so on. So only through various measures which, assure them some income, etc., midday meal schemes, food, etc., that you can bring them to school. So it has to be a positive program, right, with the adequate personnel to handle it also. So it means it has to be done on a war footing, right, as a revolutionary goal. So if you just put a school there, it's not. And secondly, you have a system where only English gets you anywhere. So even the school doesn't get, so the school education is devalued from the beginning because it doesn't provide you that. And those who can get English education will get subsidy for higher education. So like that, disincentives, absence of schools, and people have gone to court also, like you say, but very rare. One case will happen, some judgment will be given, but again it falls back into same. Today things are changing mainly because capital is taking an interest in education, because they are now beginning to realize this, what they call the demographic dividend. They want to, such a population, educated population will enable industry to operate. That's their thing. But their vision of education is highly circumscribed, very limited. They want basically they want English, because global English is today economic necessity, and technical education. They don't want the larger picture of education as a education for citizenship, education for a better being better human beings, or whatever the general education type of scenario. Humanities, they are not interested. So the idea about education is about education versus training. Training is what their focus is on, not so much on what we might call education. Right?
So no compulsory education.
There is, but it's, for instance, government gave land to people to start schools, private, and the condition was it's free land. You're getting free land, but you have to allot 25% of the admissions to poor children. Until 2 years ago, no school implemented that policy. They took the land, they built the school, and they only admitted elite children. Just 2 years ago, they insisted, and just in the last 2 years, this is being implemented. Because somebody went again to court, the issue came up and became a big issue. But for 50 years, they got away without implementing the terms of the contract. It's they're getting free in exchange for something.
I'm also thinking about the problem of illiteracy, because there is a line in the article says that Sunder lives in a written course, but according to her background, I don't think she really can read. But what might her believe that the written course can somehow give her some permission, not permission, guarantee or something?
Well, it's not. See, the prior question would be why did she agree to surrender? So this surrender itself is part of. Obviously, it's like first thing you have to do is agree with the state that you are doing something wrong, right? I mean, surrender. So you might give reasons for it, social, the injustices and why you are forced to do this and so on. But finally, you are agreeing about, that there is a mainstream society and it's better to be here than to be there. So that is one thing. But having agreed, and I suppose that agreement can also happen because you have no other, you are in a weak position. Maybe you're not doing well. If the dacoits are doing well, probably they wouldn't surrender. Maybe they'll surrender. They have their own calculations. We are not doing too well, our revenues are falling, so let's surrender and get something from the state. It's also possible, What induces that final move, But having done that, I think what she is also suggesting is they know that once you sign the agreement, there is no guarantee that everything that's agreed will be implemented. But at least on paper it is there. So once it's on paper, you may take recourse to law, saying the agreement has been breached, or public opinion is also there, that the state didn't keep up its promise. Whatever it is, the minimum, you want to have the at least the minimum guarantee that something is on paper, so it's just a difference between not hard bargain which may not yield something, or just letting them decide, which is not the So yeah, it's not that it's based on any faith. I don't think that it is that she really believed that if it's on paper but although even that is not to be ruled out, because one of the things about literacy and illiteracy is that the illiterates are taught to venerate the written word, as if it's something, like in India the paper and the written word and all are God again, so it's like literacy is magical, right? It has that, because there is a long history of exploitation by money lenders and landlords who give loans, right? They write it down in a book, and then you can write whatever you want, however, and the illiterate peasant has no way of so you go and ask, how much do I owe you? He can say whatever, and he can say it's written here. So this is a long history of the use of writing as a tool of exploitation. So in that sense, the fatality of the written word is also something that is very powerfully operating.
One thing unclear reading this article is what kind of person, in terms of her own ideological stand
Mm-hmm.
and so on, unclear. And whether she's she eventually become the MP. So in that sense, the surrender is, looking back, is a successful one.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But is she a charismatic speaker and huge influence on the?
No.
And simply because she's outlaw.
I think
Then gets elected.
by and large, because she's the outlaw and a figure of rebellion and against oppression, that is it. She doesn't have a voice actually. Somebody who articulates the feelings of a large number of people, somebody who speaks her own truth in a way that appeals to in speech. She is not known for her speeches or saying something that is in a way. Once in a while it does come through, like when she objected to her representation in the film. She had that, it seemed like she was saying something. A voice was genuinely coming out of a subject who had something to say, to articulate it and so on. But by and large, no, there's not. So that's why I was saying, there's a silence. It's actually a silent surrender in some ways.
How many times was she re-elected?
Twice she was elected, once she lost. Silent in the sense that obviously she gave election speeches, but what I meant was it's not that her speech. It's an election speech, not about who she is and touching the people by producing a authentic speech, if you like, that kind of a thing, because it's as if you could also be intimidated by the world of speech itself, right? In the sense, you have to speak, you have to say something. See, finding voice is also a hard thing. In India, this is another thing. In India, for instance, when satellite TV came to India, there was an extraordinary phenomenon, which is they could not find in India people who can speak on MTV, for instance. Because it requires a certain casual way of cool talk, and so on. In India, you couldn't find them. And India's first MTV jockeys are all from Canada, USA, and other places. Indians, but who lived there. because they have that lingo, that expression. Now, NRI. And, for instance, we had, there was this actor called Javed Jaffrey, extraordinary performer. He can imitate anybody. You just show him 5 minutes with a person, he will produce an exact imitation of that person. He is so good that he used to have a program in which he went on imitating different people, and it was a hugely popular program. But once on TV, he was asked to just be a compere for a program. That means he can't imitate, he has to speak. And he was completely, he couldn't speak. He was struck dumb, as if it were. To be himself is the one thing he couldn't do. He could be anybody else. You see? This is the thing, the voice, traditional in India, speech is not something, people are not voluble. Because of the nature of the oppressive social environment, you don't say much, it's this thing. And speech is regarded as something which is of a public character, you say something. And then in private you say all kinds of other things, which are too private to say. So this bridging the gap between the private self and the public space is an impossible task actually for a number of people. They experience it as very difficult. And I feel Phulan herself would have had that difficulty, that she could have only spoken if you had something written for her which is supposed to be the right thing to say, in that way. Generic discourse rather than, authentic speech.
Is it because she is quite
Uneducated and, from a very lower sort of social rank and, all kind of reasons. And it's basically because of the context. That is, Phulan Devi sitting in a gang with her gang in that original place, she would have spoken a lot, and she would have spoken as genuine Phulan herself. But this here, what will you say here? The idea that speech doesn't fit these surroundings. So then you have to remake yourself. You have to come back to authentic speech within a new context is a challenge which many people find insurmountable.
My story is quite late, but I have one question.
Yeah.
Is the story of Devi, the villain Devi, ever changed the woman's status in India? Because in Taiwan, that the Taiwanese media is very notorious for its lack of discipline. But in recent years, they keep reporting the rape stories of Indian women in India. And
Rape.
I'm wondering, that villain Devi, her real story ever changed the woman's status after her death?
Ever changed?
Yeah, upgrade the woman's status, even either the upper or the lower caste. No.
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't, because first of all, the rape stories that are coming out now, rape has become a big issue and everybody is getting agitated about it because it's happened in Delhi, metropolitan city, and it was a working woman, educated working woman, and people identified with her and so on. But rape is a common occurrence in India, in rural India, but it never actually causes such outrage. Routinely so many rape cases keep getting.
Perhaps the first woman who was the person who took revenge on those who raped her.
Well, many may have taken, but she is a gangster, so she was able to do it in a particularly brutal fashion. She went and massacred an entire set of people in that village. But yeah, revenge stories about rape are very common in India.
Because her story is not only dramatic but very inspirational. Can I give that?
I don't think it was inspirational in that time. In the sense that it became inspirational only after the film was made and so on, to some extent. Yeah. Because at that time it was, again, the media reports, right? Is only based on media reports that,
But that's really her life story. He really did those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Very much so.
Very special story.
There is that book, Mala Sen's book, Bandit Queen, which gives you the whole story. So you might want to read it if you are interested.
I would like to just add one point that we have the previous discussion about the peasantry and in relation to industrialization. I think we have a specificities here in Taiwan because around like 1950s we have the land reform. So actually the states gather the lands and redistribute it to the peasant. So the peasant has the ownership of the land, a very small amount of the land. So in a way, the peasant have the ownership of the land, but in a way, actually the state become the biggest landlord.
Okay.
And actually become the historical transition, like the peasant or the subaltern become or transit to like the nation subject. They are actually under the framework of a national nation state, and also in alliance with the farmers association that they peasants are actually have their like social activities within their village. They can get the loans from the land owners, like what you mentioned before. Because of this, farmers association has been institutionalized and become part of the nation state. So this kind of farm association become the key agent to deliver the loan to the peasants.
Okay.
And it is actually the only way for the peasants to get the loan.
Through the associations. Yeah. So there is a sense of initiative there, right? Farmers and looking after their own interests to some extent, is it?
And it actually become the precondition for the state to activate the kind of industrial program or the program to build up the science park, because they have the ownership or they have the right to gather or to grab the land from the peasants.
Confiscate.
And become legitimized.
Right.
Because,
That's a peculiar situation. So the state actually owns it and gives it to the farmer, and then you can take it back anytime
by law.
by law.
Even 50 years ago, you can take it back. If the peasant owns the land.
I heard something about how the sugar fields, the land where sugar was growing, was taken from the small peasants and given to big, more agri companies, to produce.
It happens a lot in Philippines and also in India as well.
Yeah.